Hi, I'm Allison Toole. I'm the director of the Town of Stowe Council on Aging, and one of the important services we provide is durable medical equipment to our seniors. Well, we have so much equipment that I was looking for an organization to donate it to, and I found this wonderful organization right here in Hudson, Mass. It's a nonprofit organization called Bridges to Malawi, and I met Dr. Brian Liss, and he took a lot of our overflow equipment, and he told me about a humanitarian medical aid trip to Malawi that they do every year. They bring high school students, so a bunch of the Neshoba seniors who are interested in going into the medical field in the future will be on the trip. And so he said that my husband and I could go too. So we're going to be going. I'm going to be working with the school kids with laptop computers, and my husband is going to be working, building a dormitory for the school. And so we're really looking forward to our trip coming up this April. So I want to introduce Dr. Brian Liss is the founder of Bridges to Malawi, and he is going to give a talk about his organization. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brian Liss. I'm the president and founder of Bridges to Malawi, which is an organization that does nonprofit work in Malawi, and today we're going to be talking about it. So there are my particulars up there. I'm an associate clinical professor of emergency medicine in the Tufts Medical School. So we're going to talk about Bridges to Malawi's current programs and also where we're headed in the future. It's changed a lot since we founded it in 2014. It originally began as a high school contest, which is in Marlborough, Neshoba, which is Bolton, Lancaster, and Stowe, and also in Hudson high schools. In addition to that, it's a medical mission trip, and we also have been providing medical supplies and donating medical equipment, including an ultrasound machine in the past, to help resource-poor hospitals where we work in Malawi. So this year, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to be donating 3 Butterfly IQs, which are really cool. They're handheld ultrasound devices. They turn your cell phone into an ultrasound machine. They're the wave of the future. When we started doing what we did, the idea was that we were just going to work in the hospitals. We were going to teach the folks there about what we knew about American medicine, and they were going to teach us about Malawian medicine. And I have to say, we've learned a lot more from them than they have from us. But one of the biggest problems that they face there is malaria. And malaria is a really big problem in sub-Saharan Africa, including in Malawi, because it kills little kids and pregnant women. And the mortality rate is anywhere between 1/3 and 2/3, depending on whose literature you read. One of the reasons it does this is because there's poor access to care. So it didn't matter once we went into these hospitals and started working there what we did. It didn't matter what the Malawians did. These little kids just died. And it was heartbreaking. So we went from the idea of trying to fix things to trying to prevent things. And I like to tell people, I was trained as a primary care internist. I'm now an emergency medicine doctor. And there's a difference between the two. So we started with the emergency medicine model, which is we put fires out. And that's what emergency medicine doctors do, at least in theory. What primary care doctors do is they prevent stuff from happening. And they have a global and holistic way of looking at everything. So they don't just fix your cholesterol, they fix your high blood pressure, and they look at your cholesterol and your kidney function, whether you have diabetes. And so they look at the entire gamut of the things that might go wrong in you and things that, if they are prevented, could keep bad things from happening. So we started trying to do this with malaria. And we started it with what was called indoor residual spraying, which is, the initials for it are IRS. We like to tell people when we're fundraising, it's the good IRS. And that worked very well for a while. What it does is it kills mosquitoes by spraying an insecticide on the walls of dwellings. And you only have to do this twice a year, and the mosquitoes land on the wall and the insecticide kills them. And the mosquitoes are what carry malaria. So if you kill them, you can keep malaria from spreading and people from getting it. Unfortunately, the mosquitoes figured out the insecticide and became resistant to it. And the replacement insecticide that was recommended by the World Health Organization, and we take all of their recommendations, that's how we do stuff when it comes to things like this, cost 8 times what the original insecticide did. And that meant we couldn't do it. We just simply couldn't afford it. So we started looking for other ways to fix the problem. So one of the ways that a lot of malaria is being wiped out in sub-Saharan Africa is by using insect repellent impregnated mosquito nets. These are being provided by the World Health Organization, by the Gates Foundation, and also by the Clinton Foundation and a whole bunch of other organizations. The government in Malawi, just when we were having this problem, trying to figure out what could we do to reduce the malaria rates where we work, was able to come up with enough money to provide mosquito nets for 60% of the population. So it's not a perfect fix, but it's made a huge difference in other parts of Africa. It's reduced the mortality rates, the malaria rates by 50% in some places. So 60% is not great, and there's certainly a gap that we need to try to fill, and so we fundraise to try to get money to do that. A mosquito net costs $10, but it saves lives. So it sounds like not a lot of money, but it's amazing the difference that it can make. But the other thing we're doing is, I want you to imagine what it would be like if you could plant a plant in your garden, in your backyard, that could keep you from getting whatever disease scares you the most. Cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, something like that. Well, there is a plant like that called Artemisia annua that actually makes it so that you can either prevent getting malaria, or if you get it, it helps get rid of malaria. The leaves of this plant have 20 or more anti-malarial properties in them. One of them is actually the go-to drug that is now being used to fix malaria. So we've provided the plants. We've bought about 1,500 of them, and they're going to be planted all over the area where we work so that the individual farmers can drink tea once a week, and that will help prevent them from getting malaria. It's not 100% perfect, but it has reduced the rates of malaria in the tests that have been done by 30-some%, and up in some places up to 50%. So we already talked about that. It would be pretty amazing, wouldn't it?
You can cut this out.
However you want to do it. So we started with this medical mission thing. We then went to prevention. But having read William Kamkwamba's book, and I highly recommend the movie, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, there's a very long description in it of famine. So Malawi has recurrent droughts. They happen every 4, 5, 6 years. And when they do, and the rains fail, people starve. Malawi's population, 80% of their population are subsistence farmers. They survive on what they grow. If the rains fail, they don't survive. So the description of the famine is very incredible. By the time the famine was close to its end, people were eating sawdust off the floor of mills where corn flour was being made in the hope that maybe there would be just a little bit of corn flour in there, and at least their bellies would be full from the sawdust. There were people wandering all over the country desperately looking for work and chances to feed their family. Sounded a lot to me like the Great Depression. So we decided that we needed to do something about this as well. We can't fix the climate, at least not completely, although we are reforesting, but we tried to come up with other ways to help. And the ways to help involve storing food during good years, so we built a storage facility, but also helping the farmers produce more than one crop a year, and also making the crops that they produce more, the crop production more effective. So by doing that, we are irrigating, so we actually will dig 20 wells this year in different villages, and also by the schools where people sometimes have to walk, students have to walk miles to get water right now. And we've already drilled a few in the last year. We buy things called treadle pumps. A treadle pump is a foot-powered irrigation pump, so it's something that has a hose that goes into the river, you pump it, and you bring the water up and it can irrigate your fields. We have an animal pass-on program. I like to tell people we borrow ideas from other organizations if they don't work where we work. So Heifer, for example, has a wonderful program where you give an animal to somebody, and the firstborn animal from that particular animal is then passed on to another poor farmer for free, and you get to keep the subsequent offspring. So Heifer doesn't work where we work, and as a result of that, we borrowed their model, and we've given away over 560 goats. And since then, we've also given away 24 cows. We now have a herd of 32. We don't quite understand how that happened, but that's because I forgot my high school biology. And we are now giving away chickens. All of these animals provide not only protein, because you can milk the cows and you can milk the goats, and ultimately when the animals die you can get meat, but they also provide manure. And we hadn't thought about this, and it's one of the cool things about what we do is the unintended consequences. When you buy cows, they can be draft animals. So now you can take a wagon and haul your produce much farther, and a much larger amount of it, to places where you can sell it, where before you'd have to carry it by hand or on a bicycle. So in addition to that, we also have a conservation agriculture program. And that includes simple things that they don't do there, like mulching. That helps keep your topsoil and the water in the soil, and makes it so your crops are better fertilized and you're more likely to get a better crop. We also have a program called Land Lease. When you read the book that when William's describing the famine, part of what happens to farmers there is a lot of them are tenant farmers and sharecroppers. And so what that means is that they don't own the land, and when they are paying the landlord the rent is actually the crop. So they have to pay the landlord first, and then whatever's left over, that's where they get the food for their family. So that's a really awful model, especially in times of drought and famine, because they're going to starve and the landlord still gets his money. So what we decided to do was to set up this program where we would help pay the poorest farmers to stay on the land, especially during times of famine. It's not meant as a welfare program in the sense that it's open-ended. Each of the farmers is only allowed to be in it for a year. So the farmer gets $10 a month for a year, and then another $20 worth of farm implements and seeds. And in the first year that we did this, we had about 100 farmers. 75 of them were able to actually buy their own land and graduate from the program without any further needs. Currently, we have 42 farmers who are on the program. So that means that we made it possible for them to not only survive, but actually prosper and move along. And that's a part of what we're trying to do is we need to change the economic opportunities for people. So I mentioned in 2019 we will drill 20 wells to provide safe, clean drinking water as well as water for irrigating crops. We also started a microcredit bank. Now that's Kiva's model, but Kiva also doesn't work where we work. So what the microcredit bank does is it provides loans to groups of women. We were told not to loan to men because they spend it on booze and girls. And we were told to use groups of women because peer pressure makes it so that everybody toes the line and does what they're supposed to do in terms of paying back the loan. The initial loan is $10. And that $10 has changed the lives of many, many women who were living from hand to mouth. And even more so their families, because secondary school, that's what they call it, we call it high school, you have to pay for your kids to go. Elementary school, which they call primary school, is free. So if you don't have the money, your kid's education stops at 6th grade and that's the end of it. This way, the people who we're helping actually not only have more money in their pockets, they can feed their families better, but they can buy some things like a goat if we didn't provide them with one, or a solar panel, and they also can send their kids to high school. And that is the best way to break the cycle of poverty in families like this. I like to tell people that everybody that's in this room and everybody that's listening to this talk, once upon a time, our ancestors were subsistence farmers. Now, isn't necessarily so that you can trace your own particular ancestry back and know who those people were, but once upon a time they were there in our lives. And somewhere that cycle of just being able to survive only on what you grew changed because somebody got educated. That's usually the reason. Even if they went to a town with no education, they had to learn a trade to be able to function there. But at some point that cycle got broken because of education. So a good part of what we're doing is trying to make it possible for people to get educated. So the ultimate thing about the microcredit bank, in addition to helping businesses being started, is that that money then goes towards education. That's usually where the moms put it. So among other businesses that we've helped start have been a tea room, a couple of restaurants, a lot of people making donuts, and a variety of markets that people start, all in $10. That's how far money goes there. The payback rate has been about 98%. We've given over 400 loans, and often the women come back for another $15 loan to help enhance their business, and they pay that back, and then they're done. So it costs $25 to make a huge change in the life of not only the individual, but the families as well. So these are things we've been doing for a few years. But what's new is we've actually started to get more involved in education and in development. So with regard to education, a few years ago we started bringing laptops, and we realized that when you're donating laptops to secondary schools, the problem is that they need electricity. So most of these schools are not wired in, and so the one school that we did donate this to 2 years ago, where we donated laptops to, we actually brought a hand-carried, very heavy solar-powered battery system. And it works, but what we thought was, well, this isn't good for the economy because we should be buying local. And it also is probably not necessary for us to be carrying this really heavy thing every year, and we want to do a bunch of schools. So we found out that it was possible for $1,000 a school to actually solar power the schools themselves by buying the solar panels in the system in Malawi and having them installed there. So I believe we're up to 7 schools now. We've donated laptops to 5, and it's really cool when you go to the school because we'll walk in and there will be 4 to 6 naked light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. And the teachers will say, as they're pointing to the light switch that they're about to turn on, watch this. And you would think when they flick that switch and the light bulb goes on, that God had just parted the Red Sea. So it's really a very cool thing for them. And again, an unintended consequence, in addition to us being able to power the laptops, is that the kids can study at night there because there's no electricity in their villages and their farms. And so unless they have solar-powered flashlights, which we bring every year and donate, but not enough to cover an entire village, This now gives them a place where they can actually spend more time studying, and it significantly changed their test scores from what we've been told. Everybody's doing better because they have time to study at night with lights on. We also have started a girls' empowerment curriculum. We had a long conversation about this. Malawi, like many developing countries, has a huge gender gap, and there's a lot of sexism. We realized that if we were going to do this, like everything we do, this has to be done as a partnership with our colleagues in Malawi, rather than us in any way, shape, or form trying to impose what we think they should be doing on them. So they agreed to it. They liked the idea. We realized that the revolution of bra burning, for example, probably wasn't a good idea there, but what we're trying to do is evolution. So we introduced The Queen of Katwe, which is a wonderful movie about an African girl who learns how to play chess and beats all of the boys. And when we showed this movie to high school kids in Malawi, at the end of it, we actually brought chess sets and we had them playing, and some of them knew how to play, and the best moment was when the two boys that I saw playing, who were probably, I don't know, juniors in high school, one of them pointed to the other one and said, "He's really good, he's the Fiona of our high school." So Fiona is the female character in the movie, so he was using her as the ideal to hold his friend up to, and that's exactly the message we want to give. So we're going to continue to bring movies like that. This year it'll be The Eagle Huntress, we also are going to show, we're going to ask the Malawians if A League of Their Own and Hidden Figures are appropriate in their mind, and we'll find out. So in addition to this, climate change is a huge deal all over the world. It's a bigger deal if you're a subsistence farmer because, again, if the rains fail as a result of climate change, you're in big trouble. Also, there's a lot of flooding that occurs as a result of that. And as we speak, there was a cyclone, translation, a hurricane that just hit that area, not where we work, but farther to the south, that caused terrible flooding and damage and killed a lot of people in Malawi as well as in neighboring countries. This is something that we want to do whatever we can to keep from happening in the future. So to do that, you have to reforest, you have to plant trees because they're the way to solve the carbon problem, at least one of the ways. You have to solar power, that's another way to do it. And you also have to make it so that people don't have a reason to cut trees down if they need a source for fire to cook with. You have to provide that for them as well. So reforestation, we planted over 80,000 trees in 2018. We planted about 10,000 in 2017. Now, it sounds wonderful, but we're not talking about a tree like this. We're talking about a sapling like that, but these trees grow very quickly, and a lot of the ones that we planted within 6 months were about 5 feet tall. We also have collaborations. So one of the cool things about what we do is that people just show up from nowhere and say, "I understand you're working in Malawi. We'd like to do something there. Here's our project. What do you think?" So these are not programs that we started, but programs that we've helped facilitate. One of them is called the Mooncatcher Project. If you are a female during the ages when you menstruate and you are a student in school, you are forced to wear a uniform. And the uniforms are picked by the superintendents of the school and the school boards, and they're all guys. And they love white skirts and light pastel colored skirts. So most girls don't have access to tampons or anything even remotely like that, and those skirts are going to stain, and so what they do is they stay home. And the result of that is that the girls fall behind in school, because this happens to them every month, and ultimately a lot of them drop out. So the solution to this problem is to find some way to provide and produce a reusable menstrual pad. And the Mooncatcher Project does exactly that. So Ellie von Welsheim is the person who started it, and she runs it, and it's out of Schenectady. And she actually has moonbees where her friends will sit around and make these things. But she also came up with a model where she goes to different countries. She has programs in Uganda and Kenya and now in Malawi, and I think she's starting in Pakistan too now, where women are trained to make them. And they're given sewing machines. We actually bought the sewing machines to help facilitate the program in Malawi. They're taught how to use the sewing machines if they don't already know. They're taught how to make the Mooncatchers. It's very simple and sort of mass-produced product. The Mooncatchers are then given away for free to high school girls. So we've given away over 300 so far, and I believe there's another 430 they're going to be given away soon. And my numbers might be off. It could be as much as 1,000 that have been given away since we started the program. So it's cool because the high school girls benefit. Now they don't have a reason to drop out of school, at least not this reason. But also the women who are learning how to do this, they get paid to make these. So this helps them economically, puts money in their pocket, makes it possible again for them to send their kids to high school if they couldn't do that before. But in addition to that, they're given an allotment. So on a monthly basis, there's a certain amount of Mooncatchers they're supposed to make. And after that, the sewing machines are available to them to be used for whatever they want to do. So they can then set up their own second business and it puts more money in their pocket. And that's a wonderful economic model. So I also got an email out of the blue from a university kid in Edinburgh, and she's part of a program called Enactus Edinburgh, and what they wanted to do was to make something called Palma soap, which is it's a mosquito repellent soap. And so we put them in touch with Peter Manjali, our colleague in Malawi, and we actually have started making that as well, and I understand it works pretty well and it's very cheap. So the reason you want to repel mosquitoes again is because mosquitoes carry malaria. So the new programs that are medical, I mentioned the Artemisia. We're working on trying to figure out how to do HPV vaccination. It's not currently being done, or it wasn't when we started thinking about this. It now is being done, but only in girls who are, if I remember correctly, 12 years old. So the target population in the United States and what the World Health Organization recommends is between the ages of 9 and 12. So that's an awful lot of girls that are going to get missed. Unfortunately, it costs $128 a vaccine unless you have a government fronting for you with an organization called Gavi, in which case it's 28 bucks, and the vaccination is twice, so that actually $14 a vaccine. So for us, it's 128 times 2. So it's way beyond our capacity to buy the vaccines right now, but it's something we're still trying to figure out if we can get the government to partner with us. Because the reason you care about this is HPV causes cervical cancer, which is a killer of young women. And Malawi has the highest rate of cervical cancer and of dying from cervical cancer in the entire world. In fact, there's one oncologist, so one cancer specialist in the whole country of 18.6 million people. So if you get this disease and you get the cancer from it, you're going to die. That's basically what happens to you. And we're talking about women in their 20s and 30s. So it's definitely something that should be prevented. I mentioned the ultrasound donation. Again, somebody came out of the blue and said that they had come up with a software program using a phone that made it possible to fetal monitor pregnant women. And that's something that's done routinely in the United States, but they don't do it in Malawi. So we took that software and the phones with us and the little device that goes with it, and they're using it, and it's already saved, I think, 10 to 15 babies since September. There's a medical school that is the second medical school in the country, so Malawi only has one right now that's functioning. There are 60 students who graduate every year from that, and a good number of them go off to other countries. So there's a very doctor-poor country. So the second medical school is an exciting thing, and it's possible that we may develop a partnership with some telemedicine where we can do some teaching for the United States about our particular skill set, because there are a variety of different healthcare providers who are involved in what we do with our medical mission trips. Some of them come once and then we never see them again because they go on to start their own programs, but there's a kind of a core group of us that go every year and have for years, and we'd be happy to help make this possible if we can work out the arrangements. The final thing in the medical programs is a free care pool. Now, every audience I've asked, when I ask them if they know what that is, they have never heard of it before. But it exists in this country. So the free care pool is a United States government and also state thing where hospitals get reimbursed for providing care that they don't get money for because they're taking care of uninsured people. So it's illegal and unethical to turn anybody away if they're sick from a hospital because they can't pay for it. So because of that, the hospitals have to swallow the cost, and the free care pool helps solve that problem. It's a little different in Malawi because they can be turned away. The government hospitals are free, but you have to be able to get to them. And one of the problems with them is that they're under-resourced in terms of money. So a month's supply of medication at a government hospital disappears in 2 weeks, and then they're out. And so if you walk in and you have this particular problem, even though in theory the care is free and they should be able to help you, they can't do it because they don't have the resources. So we work in a government hospital. It's called Kasungu District Hospital. It's a big city hospital, but we also work at St. Andrew's Hospital, which is a semi-private rural hospital that's run by the Episcopal Archdiocese of Malawi and an NGO in Britain. That one does charge, and they have a sliding scale, and when we ask them, how do you decide who's poor enough that they can get the care for free or at a substantial discount, we were told, we look at their clothing, and that's how they decide. But they also, these people are basically from the area, and so most of the healthcare providers know who has money and who doesn't just because they know something about who lives in their community. At any rate, what we do is $300 a month we give, and that money goes to help people get transportation. So if they need a CAT scan or an MRI, the nearest one is about 3 hours away in the capital city. And that would be if you got in your own car, which nobody has there, and drove yourself. So they have to be able to get there, and they also have to be able to stay there. while whatever testing and or specialty care is happening. That part nobody pays for. So we're trying to make that happen. And in addition, if people are sent by the government hospital to St. Andrews, because the government hospital is out of whatever resources they need to be able to take care of the patient's problem, and St. Andrews wants to charge them and they can't afford it, this takes care of it for them. So we try to just sort of fill that gap. It's a little Obamacare type thing in its way. There's a gap there and it needs to be filled, and that's what we do with the free care pool. So those are the medical programs. So in addition to that, we also have these agricultural programs. So I've mentioned the reforestation, but we also have a bamboo initiative. So bamboo's a grass. The cool thing about bamboo is that because it's a grass, you can cut it down and it just grows right back again. And it turns out that you can also burn it and make charcoal out of it, and the charcoal that you make out of it is better than the charcoal you get from cutting down your native trees. So instead of having the deforestation continue, this is the solution to that problem, even though it still involves burning stuff, and we're not thrilled about that. You know, people do cook there, like they do in the United States, and they don't have other energy sources. And also, the major cash crop in Malawi is tobacco, and they smoke it before they sell it. Not like this, but they actually hang the leaves in a curing place, and to cure tobacco, you have to burn stuff. And that's the major reason for the deforestation. So we purchased over 3,000 bamboo seeds in Kenya and had them brought across the border, and they're going to be planted sometime in the next 6 months when the rainy season is over, and then when it's just about to start again, so that the crop will be good. And just like with the Artemisia, the idea is that we're going to plant this both in individual farmers' plots, so it's their stuff, but also in places where there's joint tribal land, so that people that don't have land but still need access to this will be able to harvest it. It takes 3 years from when you plant it until you can actually start harvesting it, but after that you have 30 years worth of a crop before you have to replant it. So the other things that we're doing is, people in America don't really think about why is there cheese? Why is there yogurt? Why is there ham? Why are there pickles? But the reason, the answer to those questions is, these are all ancient ways of preserving food. And once upon a time, there wasn't electricity and there weren't refrigerators, and so if you milked your cow, your milk went bad the next day. But if you make cheese out of that milk, it's good for months. And you can carry it with you in your pocket wherever you go. And, you know, and it's concentrated protein. So the Malawians don't make cheese. We're actually going there to teach them, and as part of what we're doing, we're starting a dairy cooperative. The upfront cost for that will be about $170,000, and partnering with a Rotary Club, we hope we'll have the money in the next 24 months to make this all happen. It doesn't just involve buying cattle, it involves rebuilding a site where there was a dairy farm back in the 1970s that was a demonstration project, but also figuring out how to make the cheese, how to transport it, how to get the milk to market, how to transport that, developing the market itself. This is all something that Heifer did 120 some miles north in Tanzania, and their model, which I hope we will be able to reproduce, took the next step in that they actually got the government of Tanzania to start providing milk in elementary schools for the little kids for free. So that helps the farmers because now they've got a steady market. But if you have protein malnutrition and you're a little kid growing up, it's bad for your brain. So you will be, to some extent, cognitively and developmentally disabled compared to your peers who don't have protein malnutrition. At least you have an increased risk of that problem. So if you put milk in the schools and you give this to the little kids on a regular basis, you know, you're making a huge dent in the future badness, because again, you can break that cycle of poverty because the kids will be better educated, they'll be smarter, they'll be able, as a result of that, because they're nourished better, to also fight diseases, even malaria. They won't necessarily not get it, but they're more, if they're healthier, they're less likely to die from it or suffer severe disabling consequences from it. And the result of all of that is that you enhance the economic opportunities ultimately, and you raise all the boats and everybody does better. That's the plan that we have. So we can't do this for the whole country, by the way. I'm talking about Malawi like we're working everywhere, but we're not. We work in an area called the Kasungu East District, which has a population of 150,000 people, we've been told, in an area of about 4,200 square miles. And about half that population is at risk for all the things that we've been talking about. And that's our target population that we work on. So we're going to teach people how to pickle. We're going to teach them how to make cheese. We also want them to dehydrate fruit. Same thing. You know, we buy this stuff like raisins without giving it a second thought. But that too is a way of making it so that raisins last forever. Grapes go bad in a week. So I've personally been making cheese for 8 months and eating it myself, and I'm still alive. So I know that it's workable. It's actually very easy to do. So where is Malawi? Took a while to get to this slide. There it is. It's in southeastern Africa. I tell people the easiest way to remember it is to remember where Madagascar is, which is the big island off to the right there as you're looking at the picture of Africa, and go in 2 countries, because the one on the coast is Mozambique. So Malawi is this little sliver of a country. It's about the size of Pennsylvania. Actually, it's probably smaller than that. And it has a huge population. So it's one of the most densely populated countries in the world. I mentioned William Kamkwamba's book, and I'm sorry I couldn't figure out how to orient this properly, but it's called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. It's a wonderful story. William was affected by the fact that this famine made it impossible for his parents to pay the fees, and so he could not go to high school. And so he went to the local library that had just been donated by a nonprofit, and he taught himself how to build an electricity generating windmill, which he managed to do without killing himself in the process. There's a picture of it right on the book there. So it was pretty rickety. It was about 80 feet off the ground, and there's no brake on the top, and the things that were whirling around pretty fast, and he was using an uninsulated wire. And he's a 14-year-old male. So it's amazing that he didn't electrocute himself, didn't get cut to pieces, didn't fall off the thing, didn't set fire to the house, managed to get it to work. And what ultimately happened to him was that somebody from the nonprofit came to see how the library was doing. The librarian took them to William's house. Then they called a reporter in Malawi, who then got in touch with an American reporter. And by the time he was maybe a year older, William was giving TED Talks all over the world. And he was on The Daily Show. This was around 2009. Our kids read this book in middle school in this area. So they all knew the story. It turns out that this all took place in a village where he grew up called Wimby, and we work in that village. So I didn't know that at first. So we've been to the house. We actually started a little museum there to teach people how the windmill works, as well as how an internal combustion engine works. We bought models, and we have little posters and things in English and in Chichewa, the native language of Malawi. And William is on our board. So the cool thing is that very recently they also have started, there's a brand new Netflix movie which just came out, which I highly recommend, because if you want to know what Malawi is like in terms of what it looks like, what it's like to be there, the movie was shot in Wimby, so it's where we work, one of the places. I'm just going to pass on this. These are pictures of medications and things that we donate. As I said, we bring a lot of medicines with us. We probably bought about $4,200 worth of medication this year. Goes real fast there, actually. But they're all life-saving things, like inhalers, albuterol inhalers for asthmatics. Something called tranexamic acid, which probably nobody listening to this has ever heard of unless you're a physician, but it's a thing that stops bleeding. So it's used all over the world in trauma cases, but the main reason it's used in Malawi is when women have a baby, if they can't stop bleeding after they've had the baby, this can save their life. Antibiotics also are other things that we bring. So these are just pictures of us arriving, of the medical mission trip. I'm going to go through them fast because it wasn't really originally part of the talk. This is what the infrastructure looks like when you're going from city to city in Malawi. But once you're out in the countryside where we work, the infrastructure looks entirely different. This is the greeting that we get when we get there. We work and live in what's called the Anglican compound. So there's an orphanage there, a primary school, a secondary school, and St. Andrew's Hospital. And K2 Tasso, which is our partner organization, has their headquarters right across the street from where the compound is. So this is where we live and work. And we're like the circus when we come. You know, there's no television and stuff like that. So when the Bridges to Malawi folks show up, the orphans are just so excited to see us. And because we've done this so many years, this will be the 8th year that I've gone, there are individual orphans who adopt us. So I have my own special orphan. His name is Precious. He was the one who was in the picture at the beginning of the talk. And I don't know if I see him. Yeah, there he is right there. He's the guy in the black there. So this was Samantha McLaughlin. She was the high school contest winner last year. She's in college now, and that's her special orphan because she went 3 years in a row. And that kid's name is Charity. These are some of the other high school kids that we take. The way the contest works is I give 3 hours worth of lecture at a medical school level on tropical illnesses, including malaria and HIV, which is not a tropical illness, but it's a big problem in Malawi. And then the succeeding week, this is done in early November, my partner Don Hangen, who's an orthopedist, gives a talk on all things Malawi. So their economy, their politics, their geography, everything there is to know about it. And at the end of that, we give a multiple choice test, and whoever gets the highest score gets to go with us for free. So a lot of high school kids get very motivated to do this, and if they don't win, they go back to their parents, and since this is November, they say, here's what I want for Christmas or Hanukkah. And so they get to come along, but they have to pay their own way. So this year we're taking 12 high school kids with us. They're all seniors. I I can tell you, because we've been doing this for a very long time, and actually the origins of this program go back to a program I started in Nicaragua in 2003. Some of these high school kids have gone on to go to medical school, some to nursing school, some have joined the Peace Corps. And there's a selection bias in the sense that they kind of maybe were headed in that direction to begin with, but all of them say that we've impacted them tremendously. I mean, imagine if you were 17 or 18 going to a country like this, and one year we were there when there was a famine, not as bad as what William described, and we actually we purchased and gave away sacks of maize, of corn, to starving people. So Peter staged it so that every single high school kid whose family had paid like $1,000, it was $100 for a sack of corn, got a chance to look those people in the eye and shake their hands. And they're going to have those pictures up in their offices, on the walls in their houses, wherever, for the rest of their lives, and remember what that felt like. So this is Chichewa for good morning. It also is for how are you. It actually really means how did you sleep, and it's pronounced Mazukabanji, although there's some dispute amongst the Americans as to exactly how you pronounce it, but that's what I hear them say when they say it. This is in the hospital with the high school kids during the mission trip. Notice the mosquito nets in the hospital. So there's a high school kid. So we don't let them operate on people, but if they have EMT skills, and so they can take a blood pressure and take a pulse and things like that, we certainly let them do that. But we let them use stethoscopes, and if they're interested in trying to find out what it's like to be a healthcare provider, one of the cool things about this program is they're experiencing two very different cultures from what their reality is. One is the Malawi culture, but the other one is us, the healthcare providers. It's a little bit like, suddenly entering an episode of MASH and being part of the experience. This is a Dutch medical student who was there when we were there. She was very cool, and she's got a newborn there. One of the things that she did was she, like us, looked at the problems that were there and came up with her own solutions to some of them. So Malawi hospitals, and actually this is true in much of the developing world, what they do is they provide health care. So you think of that and you say, well, so do American hospitals. No, they just provide health care. They don't feed you. They don't do your laundry. They don't do anything but give you medication and nursing care, and the medical officer who's taking care of your care. That's it. So if you want to be fed when you're in the hospital, if you want your laundry done, your family member has to come and do that. So they have to stay there. And that's one of the reasons why these little kids die from malaria, because if you are a mom and dad and you're running a subsistence farm, so you're barely making it to begin with, and you have 7 kids on that farm, and one of those kids gets sick with malaria, and it's 2.5 hours by foot to the hospital because there's no 911 and no ambulances, how are you going to handle this problem? Well, you're probably not going to drop what you're doing and take the kid to the hospital at the first sign of trouble. You're going to wait until that kid is so sick you don't have a choice. And that's why a lot of these kids die. Because you can actually treat malaria with pills in its early stages. And there are outreach programs that K2 Tasso does, our Malawian partner, that tries to make it so that this is not an issue. But there are a lot of kids who fall through the cracks or just get sick so fast it doesn't matter. So where do these people stay? Well, they don't live in the hospital. Actually, they do in the pediatric ward. They sleep under the cribs on the floor. But the others all stay in what's called a hostel, which is a building that was built by the hospital, but there are no mosquito nets in it, there are no mattresses on the floor, and there's no screening on the windows. And this medical student decided to fix all that. So she set up a GoFundMe page and then took up a collection from us and bought mattresses and screens, not only for that, but actually for the hospital itself. She put screens up. What they're doing there is the problem with the mosquito nets is they get holes in them, so it's really a strange experience when you're making rounds in the morning and you see the mosquitoes flying around inside the net. Not supposed to happen. We try to leave things behind that are permanent for the high school kids so that they can say, not only did I have this experience, but I left something permanent. So if you look at the pictures on the wall there in the pediatric ward, those are paintings that were done by high school kids from a Bridges to Malawi trip, and we do that every year. That's a nebulizer. I love asking this question because there's always some clown in the audience when I say, what is that? Who says, it's a stapler. But I'm not asking about the stapler, it's the thing next to it. So that is a stethoscope for listening to fetal hearts. And when I was a medical student back in the late 70s, I remember it being used. My wife was a labor and delivery nurse for 40 years. She remembers it being used, but nobody uses these in America anymore. So the ultrasound devices that we are providing, what they do is they replace that. There's the ultrasound machine we bought years ago. I think we got it in 2015, I want to say, and it's already out of date. So these handheld devices that we've just purchased are much better. And the nice thing about them is this is relatively portable, but it's still heavy. But the little ones that we've bought, you can carry anywhere and do anything with. And you can actually use them to replace a radiology department. And neither the big hospital nor the little hospital we work in have radiology departments. So you can diagnose pneumonia, for example, or a broken bone using ultrasound. It's just not routinely done in the States because you can get an x-ray. This is the women's hostel. I like to tell people how universal people are. So when we go to take a picture in a place like this, we always ask permission. And as soon as we do that, the women hold up their hand after they say yes, and they straighten their clothing, you know, and they look at each other. Do I look okay? And they check their hair, and they do everything that all of us Americans would do under the same circumstances, because we're all the same. So there's the medical student outside the hospital with the screens. This is the oral medication for malaria that I mentioned. This is our colleague, Peter Minjali. So he's a clinical medical officer. As I mentioned, there's only one medical school in the country, and most of the doctors who get turned out leave the country, but they also use a British system, at least it's a colonial system, where the doctors, the people like me with an MD, are administrators. They don't tend to do much clinical medicine. So the people who do are clinical medical officers. So Peter went to what's the equivalent to 3 years of medical school and a year of internship, and that qualifies him to be a clinical medical officer. And I would let him take care of any of my family members because he's that good. And he delivers babies, and he takes care of 100-year-olds, and he takes care of AIDS patients, and everything in between. So he's taught me an enormous amount, and I teach him. And the interesting thing is that when we first started working together, the life expectancy in Malawi was about 48 years. It's getting up to the late 50s now. So they're starting to see more chronic illnesses, which is something that I'm very good at because we see it here all the time. Congestive heart failure and diabetes and high blood pressure. They're not used to seeing as much of that. So that's the stuff that I can teach them about while he teaches me about how to handle malaria. So right there, he's actually making capsules with Artemisia annua in it. And those capsules can be used in a patient who is dying from malaria, hasn't responded to the drugs. There's some data to show that giving them capsules of the ground up leaf actually will save their lives. This is a person who is supposed to be teaching people how to farm properly. If you look carefully at this picture, you'll see that there's no mulch there. So we had a little talk with him about how to improve the lives of the farmers. As I mentioned, water is a big problem there. It's particularly difficult if you're a female because the females are the ones that carry the water from one place to another. Those are probably 20 to 30 gallon buckets, and these women could easily have walked miles like that. So imagine what that would feel like every day. And look at how dry the corn crop is next to it. That's why they're carrying the water. This is an earthen dam that was built as part of the land lease program. I have a son who's an environmentalist, so I try not to let him know about this picture. But this helps stop up, to some extent, a river so that the water can be used to irrigate crops. That's a treadle pump. This is a sapling, so I mentioned the reforestation program. You can see how small the trees are, or the saplings are when they're first planted. But this is what they look like later on. So Peter is just in the right-hand side of that picture. He's about 5'4". When you stand him next to these moringa trees in the background, which were planted 6 months ago, they are taller than he is. And the moringa tree actually provides shade, protein, and vitamins, and some herbal medicine properties in its leaves. So it's a very cool plant, and it grows really fast. Everywhere you go, you will see evidence of deforestation, whether it's legal or not. So these women are carrying wood from who knows where, from trees that were cut down to burn, to make charcoal, and that's why the bamboo is so important. In the 1970s, we're not talking about 100 years ago, if you looked at this vista, everywhere you looked, you would see trees. Look at it now. Look at the ridge in the back. There are almost no trees left there. And it's estimated that in the next 20 years, all the trees will be gone in Malawi, so we have to do something to stop this problem. So there actually are people who are, not us, but people in villages trying to do something about this. These guys are the keepers of the forest. That's their official title in the village that was one of the places where we work. The forest, which is what they call that thing to the right, I would call it a grove because it probably has 20 trees in it, and it says something about what they mean by a forest and how bad the deforestation is something that they take care of. And so what you're seeing next to that is a field where they are planting trees that we have donated so that they actually will have a real forest someday. We do consider the economic part of this, so when we're planting trees, we're planting guava and mango and things that you can actually both eat from and also sell, in addition to the moringa and some of the other trees that we planted. These are what the reforestation saplings look like. They're cylinders full of dirt with a little sapling in it. I tell people in America there would be one green thing, see all those dots there, that would say tree. They hired some artist to actually put a dot for every single tree that they planted around the K2 Tasso headquarters. And there is, right there, a legend that tells you what kind of trees they planted, including cashew nut trees and moringa and pear trees and so on. This is called Cindy's house. That's my wife's name. So this is the famine storage facility that we built, and they decided to name it that. We didn't ask them to. So it's a three-part building. On the right-hand side is where the moon catchers are made. In the middle is which is the open space, is a place where palliative care patients have a counseling session. And on the left-hand side, I'm not sure I have a picture of it, is where we store the grain. So my wife grew up on a dairy farm, and she said, you know, if you're going to store grain for a long period of time in a building, you have to worry about mice. And I said, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I'm a kid of the suburbs. So one of the things that's cool about how things work there and how we have to think is that you don't have to come up with new solutions to old problems. There's the solution, the mouse mitigation project. So they put a couple of cats in there and they don't have any issues with mice. And there's a lot of that, just like the cheese and the pickles and the dehydration that we talked about of fruit. There are a lot of things that are old ways of doing things that we just don't think about because we've passed that in our country. I like to tell people Malawi's about 80 years behind us. It's like they are in the Great Depression. More orphans. These are moon catchers being made. That's the palm of soap. They start out by making these very long slabs and they cut them into pieces. This is the infrastructure we deal with. So we go there during the rainy season, and that is a road, even though it looks like a lake that we're driving through. This is a typical village, and that's what the infrastructure there looks like. This is a typical dwelling. Cute little kid, huh? So among other things that we did, we bought a Polaroid camera, and I had the high school kids take a picture of every single kid that was at this rural village. So we work in hospitals, but we also do rural outreach clinics where we'll go see everybody in a village, and we'll spend the whole day there, sometimes 400 or 500 people. Some of them are really sick, and imagine if you're seizing with a temperature of 105 because you have malaria and you're sick as hell, and you're 3 hours from the hospital. How do you get there? What they do is they put them on a motorcycle. And it's usually a kid. They have the parent, the mom, squashing the kid between the kid. So the kid is behind the driver, then the mom, and sometimes she's got another kid on her back. And that's how they get there. Because there's no ambulance and there's nothing even remotely like that's easy to come by there. So the cool thing about this is when you go in people's dwellings, you don't see anything there on the inside on the walls. So we're always taking digital pictures and we're showing them to the moms and showing them to the kids, and everybody loves it, but there's no record of it that we left behind. So with the Polaroids, we were able to do that. So this is a really big winner. We have to be creative there. This is part of a rural outreach clinic. We ran out of places to see people, and so that is a doctor's office, that van there, with people waiting to go inside and be evaluated. We don't have HIPAA there. That's a little kid looking at what's going on the inside. I take pictures of women walking around there because they carry the most amazing things on their heads, and notice their hands are at their sides. I mentioned cows. Peter's pointing to this. He told us that this particular individual who was given goats got one goat. She ended up with 6, and of those 6, when she sells 5 of them and keeps the original goat, she'll be able to send 2 of her kids to high school, and that wouldn't have happened otherwise. This is a room where we were visiting a village and we asked how many people had gotten goats from us. Look at all the hands. So that's my niece Naomi Liss. She is teaching people how to use the laptops. The laptops, even though they're not hooked up to the internet, have something in them called the Khan Academy, and that is like having the internet without the internet. So they're stuffed full of like the entire English language library of works, both English and American. So Shakespeare and F. Scott Fitzgerald, all that stuff's in there. So it's like you give a library to a school when you're doing this. But in addition, there are videos on biology and chemistry and physics and all kinds of things, and also on conservation agriculture and techniques to make it so that you can raise your crops more effectively. So the idea is, when we're providing these to the schools, we're giving kids abilities that they didn't have before. There were 440 some kids at the 5 schools that we donated to, and of those kids, 2 of them had seen a computer before. So if you teach them how to type, which they didn't know how to do, that's a skill they can use in the city. Teach them how to use laptops and program and stuff, that's a huge skill they can use in the city. It puts money in their pocket, they can send it back home to mom and dad, more of the kids can get educated. But the other message we didn't want to give was farming is not a good thing, you need to go to the city to enhance yourself. If they want to stay on the farm, we want to make sure that they can farm more effectively. And that's why that information is in there as well. We had a meeting with the teachers before we actually donated the laptops. This is a laptop donation ceremony with the school kids. This is another one. I mentioned the light from the solar panel there. There are lights inside the school. That's what a typical school looks like there. The solar panels are on the top there. That's why that picture's there. This is Jen Hardy, who's our IT specialist and teacher. She actually is a teacher at Worcester Tech. And so she leads the program with regard to understanding what the laptops do. And when we donate them, the chiefs the PTA, the faculty, the parents, and the kids are all in the room having this experience. So they all have a chance to work with these things. We also hired somebody to keep an eye on how this is going. So even though we're only there for 2 weeks out of a year, we are basically a 24/7 program, because a lot of the things that I've mentioned, they're being done constantly, even though we're not there. We help come up with the ideas in partnership with the Malawians, and we raise the money. But for programs like this especially, we want to find out, how is this working? What isn't working? Do the laptops not work today? Do the kids not, are they not moving along in terms of what we think they should be learning? And how do we change all that? We also have an agriculture specialist that we pay for who watches the agriculture programs for the same reason. And I haven't mentioned this, but 100% of our donations go to all of these programs. So if there is an administrative cost, and there are a few, my wife and I pay for that out of our pocket, and we are the single largest donors to Bridges to Malawi. We probably pay for half of the $119,000 budget that we had last year. They had a ceremony there to welcome us and also to introduce the idea of laptops. It was very cool. We actually picked up these guys who were the comedians. And I tell people that when I first go there, although Peter Manjali and I speak English, our accents make it hard for us to understand each other for a day. So I could swear when we got in the vehicle that he said we were going to stop to pick up the comedians. And I was thinking, did he mean committee members? Why would we be getting comedians? So we pick these people up and we go out. And the way these laptop donation ceremonies work is there are speeches given by the chiefs and the PTA head and the headmaster of the school, and by us. You know, we're all sort of explaining this is the 21st century that we're bringing to this area and why we're doing it, and how important it is for the kids to understand, you know, what opportunities are available in these. And then they brought out these comedians, and they did these skits where the first three were in Chichewa, a native language, where they were explaining to a parent why this was a good idea, and the father's like, oh, no, I grew up, we didn't need these. And the second skit, it was a chief who wanted to take the laptop home because he's a chief after all, and he was being told, no, this is for the kids, you can't have it. So they made fun of everybody, the faculty member, the headmaster, the parents, the chiefs, everybody. The only people they didn't poke fun at until the last skit were the Americans. So if you look carefully at the slide, you will see an African guy, one of the comedians, with his face painted white, with surgical gloves on his hands, dressed like he's an American, and then they made fun of us. And it was so cool, because when we're there, we're drinking lots of water because it's hot and humid. We tell everybody to do that. The Africans are used to their climate, so they don't. By the end of the fourth school, which is 4 days into this particular individual had borrowed my cell phone, my hat, my camera, my water bottle, and he was talking to Donald Trump as he was leaving, saying, I'll be back home soon. So it was wonderful, and it's a very ancient technique. This is like what the Greeks used to do to help people understand things that are important in their lives. That is a toilet, so something else we need to be working on. This is the inside of a girls' hostel. So one of the things we're going to be doing this year is we're going to start a construction project, which is something we've not done before. We're actually going to rebuild this girls' hostel. And the reason it's called that is this is for poor farm girls who have to walk miles back and forth every single day to go to school. So this makes it possible for them to actually stay at the school, which is a lot easier on them for lots of reasons, and also increases their ability to study. So the hostel plan is for a 60-person hostel, and we actually have one of the high school kids who's raising money right now to get mosquito screening, nets, and mattresses for this place. As I said, the high school kids always like to leave something on the wall, so I suggested the Lorax this year, and we actually left the book behind so that the story will be told, but they did a great job of carrying it out. That was a dwelling once upon a time, now it's for the animals. That's a chicken coop. That's a typical house. And we're almost at the end. This is why we do this. We do it because this makes a huge difference in the lives of our high school kids and also in the lives of the people that we work with. And I wish I could say I posed that picture, but I didn't. But isn't it cool? And these are the kids of Malawi saying goodbye. And that's the end of the talk. Zikomo Kwambiri, which apparently I misspelled, but that means thank you very much in Chichewa.